Presentation is the effects of mindfulness training on ninth grade students' reading test scores and reported test anxiety. My name is Justin Sharp. I'm a student at Morningside College, and this presentation is for EDUC 699. A little more background information on me. My name is Justin Sharp. I graduated from the University of Iowa in 2010, where I did my undergraduate work in English. I am now a graduate student at Morningside University and a ninth grade ELA teacher at Sheraton High School. The problem statement simply is this: reading comprehension growth is stagnant in our country. The NAEP test, that's the National Assessment of Educational Progress test, shows marginal growth in reading comprehension over the last 40 years. The graphic to the right illustrates this, with the score in 1992 being 260 and the score in 2017 being 267. This is not the entire 40-year run of the test, but it does show that since 1992, the scores only increased by 7 points, which is marginal growth at best. Similarly, the PISA test showed that the United States ranked 15th out of all the countries who took the test in reading literacy, which was not a measurably different result than when the United States and the other countries took the same test in 2000. A compounding issue is increasing test anxiety, especially in younger and younger children. What was previously seen in college-age students and high school-age students is now being seen in junior high and even elementary school students. Universities also report higher test anxiety in their students, with one Midwestern university showing an over 200% increase in visits to counseling services and a nearly 200% increase in the total number of clients that their counseling services were seeing due to test anxiety related reasons. Why did I choose this research? I chose this topic to research because I have seen firsthand the effects of test anxiety, especially among the low SES population at our school, many of whom simply lack the coping skills to combat test anxiety effectively. A little review of the literature. What has been tried so far, starting with the competition and reward schemes used to enhance reading comprehension. This would be the familiar Book It and Accelerated Reader programs. Studies have shown that these programs fall short because they reward quantity of reading, meaning number of books read, over true comprehension. And this, in fact, can lead to lower motivation and increased procrastination when these same elementary school students become college students. Another solution that has been tried is the increasing use of data, including data walls and all kinds of big data solutions. Many teachers and administrators report that they are drowning in data and that the data walls that they are using are merely a show for parents and decision makers. And the reason for that may be that data walls do not provide the troubleshooting information. They do not give students a path to increase their scores or fix their deficits, but only an illustration of where they are. And this, in fact, can have a chilling effect on low performing students who shut down or give up when they see their score compared to the rest of their peers. The solution may lie in the emerging field of mindfulness. Mindfulness was first pioneered by Dr. Jonathan Kabat-Zinn in the early 90s and is defined as the psychological process of bringing one's attention to experiences occurring in the present moment. This is closely related to the idea of focus or controlled thought, the idea of eliminating distractions and being fully in the present moment. One of the major studies to use mindfulness in an educational setting was the Attention Academy study. The Attention Academy study involved students in a large elementary school in which half were enrolled in what was called the Attention Academy, which consisted of 12 mindfulness lessons over a 6-week period, And at the end of the test period, students in the experimental group showed a statistically significant increase in attention holding and a corresponding decrease in test anxiety. The study that perhaps informed my research the most was the 2013 study by Mrazek and colleagues, in which they studied the effects of mindfulness training on GRE scores among graduate college students. These students took 4 classes per week for 2 weeks. These were intensive courses, 10 to 20-minute courses on sensory-based experience training. And students also completed a similar amount of time in home practice and meditation. And what these researchers found was that there was a statistically significant increase in GRE scores at the end of the study. My goal was to evaluate the effectiveness of mindfulness training on ninth grade students' reading comprehension scores and to evaluate their overall level of test anxiety. My hypothesis was that students who took place in a program of mindfulness bell ringer lessons would show higher growth on the MAP reading test and lower rates of generalized test anxiety. The design of this study was a between subjects design. The variables of the study were the type of bell ringer lesson that was used. Students in the experimental group received mindfulness bell ringers lessons, and students in the control group received traditional ELA bell ringers. The dependent variable in this case was their scores on the MAP measure of academic progress test in reading comprehension, and also their scores on the West Side Test Anxiety Survey. The impact of this study was to test mindfulness as a tool to decrease test anxiety and increase students' self-efficacy. Because anxiety and a low level of mindfulness are a significant predictor of at-risk student behavior, as shown by the Carsley study in 2017. And it was my goal to help teachers make informed instructional decisions about the most effective and efficient use of their instructional time at the start of each class, and also to address gaps in existing research, which seemed to either focus on mindfulness techniques with elementary school students or with college-age students. The study participants in my study were ninth graders in 4 sections of my ninth grade English Language Arts class. There were 45 in the experimental group and 47 in the control group, with a roughly similar split of males and females in each group. These students were of varying socioeconomic status, and there was very limited racial diversity in the group. Permission for the study was obtained from the building principal and district superintendent. I also consulted with the school instructional coach, and parental contact was not required for this study. Materials: the students who received the mindfulness lessons, those were adapted from Daniel Rechthoffen's Mindful Education Workbook, and I'll show an example of that here. This was an activity called anchor breathing, and so it was each activity was designed to be 5 to 10 minutes in length, and would start with focusing on breathing techniques, emotional control, and then move to higher order mindfulness techniques as the lessons progressed. The students in the control group received traditional ELA bell ringers from Laura Rendazzo's set of high school English bell ringers. This is an example of the kind of bell ringer activity that the students who were in the control group received. As you can see here, it's a pretty simple vocabulary lesson that would take roughly around the same time as students in the experimental group. So the procedure, these students would receive 4 5 to 10 minute sessions a week at the start of each class. That's the traditional bell ringer time. And the experimental group got the mindfulness lessons. The control group had the experimental the control group had the traditional ELA bell ringer activities. Data analysis, I used their winter map test scores as a baseline, and then their spring map test scores as their post-test. The Westside Test Anxiety Survey was also given before the study began and then as a post-test at the end. And then a t-test was used since it was a between subjects design. The results showed a small but statistically significant increase in students' reading comprehension scores in the experimental group as compared to the control group. The experimental group showed a mean score of 229.8 out of a possible high score of 350 on the test. The control group showed a mean score of 224.7 at the end of the study. And as you can see from the table below, this was statistically significant. This chart shows the control group and the experimental group, the pretest and the post-test scores. You'll note that both groups, the control and the experimental, both showed gains, but the experimental group's gains were significantly more than the control group. There was a statistically significant decrease also in self-reported test anxiety in the experimental group as compared to the control group. So the experimental mean was a 2.37 and the control mean was 3.08. And on this test, the lower the score indicated the lower level of test anxiety. And you can see that here, there's practically no change in the control group, and the experimental group shows a significant decrease. The implications of this study, this research supports the positive effects of mindfulness training and practice on students' test scores and just overall student well-being. Schools should take mindfulness programs seriously. There's evidence that mindfulness training can be a possible alternative to traditional bell ringer activities or incorporated as part of a general study skills or character training program. With limitations to the study, there were only 2 data points used, a pre-test and a post-test. If a different assessment were used, there could be multiple data points which may add validity to the study. Also, a more generalized assessment, not focusing just on reading comprehension, might show a more generalized or broader effect. Also, some data for the test, some data was collected through self-report. The Westside Test Anxiety Survey and the Children and Adolescent Mindfulness Measure data was through self-report. And so if it was gathered through observation, that may be more authentic data. A few recommendations for the future. Continued research in this field would strengthen the findings. This is a new field and there's limited research out there. So building the body of research would be very important. Also, these findings could be replicated potentially in other classrooms. So it could be an indicator of gains in other academic areas, or the study could be replicated with students of different ages. Lastly, here are the references for my presentation. And thank you for watching my presentation.